Good morning, everyone. I think we've started. Our apologies for the slight delay. We had a few technical issues with the webinar system. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, and especially to the Western Australians out there who have started their day early for this webinar. My name is Matt Ogg, and I'm a senior journalist here at Business News Australia. And it is a great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Operating the Board Collaboratively, Efficiently and Securely. In a world where remote working has become the norm, the pandemic has accelerated trends towards the digitalisation of boardrooms. But digitalisation in and of itself is not enough to get your business up to speed. It is not some item on a checklist that you can just simply mark as done. Board digitalisation is a nuanced and complex topic, but when it's done well, it can offer the opportunity to simplify and enhance board processes, giving directors more time and better tools for making decisions. We are joined today by three experts on board governance, education, and technology. And just a reminder, throughout today's webinar, if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask us and we'll try to respond after the initial discussion. So the first guest I'm joined by is Lisa Cook, founder and managing director of Get On Board Australia. With 12 years of experience serving on boards across a range of sectors, Lisa's mission is to develop and educate new and aspiring company directors, which she does in various ways, from one-on-one sessions to workshops to her podcast, which I'd encourage all of you to listen to this summer, Board Shorts. Lisa, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So you are interacting with both directors and aspiring directors day in, day out, and you've really got your finger on the pulse of what people are seeing as the key challenges. What are you seeing as the biggest issues facing boards at the moment in Australia?
Yeah, I think it nearly doesn't matter what the type or size of board it is, but what we see are a lot of common challenges that are shared across these different types of boards. And I'll just run through a bit of a laundry list that usually comes up when I ask people this question. You're looking at things like too much time being spent on operational issues, not enough time being spent on the things that really matter, that are very important for the organisation, not just now, but into the future as well. They're rushing through things. There's an unequal workload distribution. So you have a small cohort of the board members carrying most of the weight of the board. You've got things like meeting papers being distributed too close to the meeting date, which leads to really inadequate preparation being done by the board members in the lead up to that board meeting. So what this tells me is that a lot of these issues really point back to the board members, the directors, really not understanding or having some uncertainty about their role on this board, in this organisation at this particular point in time.
And how does that trend relate to the increasing digitalisation of boards? Is there a connection there, or even a mismatch in the way that directors are going about this digital transformation?
Well, I think you can run into some serious problems as a board if you just look at digital tools, technology as the solution to your underlying problems. And that's just not the case. You can't take really clunky, inefficient analog processes that you may be running in the real world and shove them into a digital solution and expect them to help you, to help increase your collaboration, your efficiency, your effectiveness. It's just not going to happen that way.
Why is it that you think that we see this instance of some directors carrying more weight than others? Can that be solved by digital tools, do you think?
I certainly think it can help. But what I encourage all boards to do on a regular basis, and that regular means whatever it means to your board, what makes sense, is to really check in with each other around your rules of engagement. What are your expectations of each other? What are your expectations individually in relation to the work that the board has to do? And really get clear on that. And it's not just getting clear on that, it's also tying that into the broader conversation around your boardroom culture, which of course feeds into organizational culture. What are your values? Obviously, we value a shared workload, everyone putting in and committing to the work of the board, but also having a really strong atmosphere of accountability. We have accountability as a board to the people that are in the organization. We need to adopt some of that to ourselves as a board, sometimes when it's necessary.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have a chance to discuss those issues in greater depth later on. But when it comes to accountability, I think our next guest will have a lot to say about it and matters around compliance and the demands and responsibilities of board directors in this day and age. I'd like to introduce everyone to Tamara Barr, who is the founder and managing director of Clear Sky Blue. Clear Sky Blue is a provider of company secretarial services and corporate governance services around Australia. Tamara, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. So you're dealing with a slightly different demographic. I know that's not the case across the board, but you are dealing with a lot more well-established, long-standing board members. So I imagine that you would see things a little bit differently to Lisa. What do you view as some of the key challenges at the moment and how boards are adapting to the digital transformation at play?
One of the biggest challenges that the boards I'm working with seem to have faced is coming on to the webinar platform. You know, it's fraught with issues of just joining the meeting in general, coming in and making sure that you're looking at your digital calendar to know when your meetings are and things like that. It seems to be one of those things that people have been so used to coming in and attending meetings in real life and maybe having a lunch before or afterwards, and now having to show up on screen and have that meeting time being exact, and so making sure you get all those conversations in the time that you have on screen.
And that makes preparation so critical and having the right board tools in place. So how do you view, because Lisa was talking about sometimes people getting in their board packs last minute and the directors not having enough time to prepare. Is that something that you're also observing? And what are some of the solutions to that?
Absolutely. One thing I do see across my boards and different companies I've worked in the past is making sure the chair specifically, but the rest of the board as well, is in control and putting forward what they want from their company and their management team, so that conversation can run smoothly and can be succinct and useful. So what I like to see there, and how I help and add value, is to help to create an agenda which helps to draw out the right conversations at the right time throughout the meeting. And that agenda being digital can help when you've got timings and links to the right papers and things like that. The other thing I like to see is a really well thought out executive summary. Just because you have a digital platform that allows you to hold multitudes of data doesn't mean we should be augmenting packs from 300 to 700 pages. What we want to see is a really good and well-designed executive summary, maybe 1 to 4 pages at the most. And if you really do need to add data at the back of that, we can think about having a secondary appendix pack or something like that. But having those executive summaries and a good agenda really helps to bring those conversations in line and control the meeting.
And how widespread is this practice of inflating the board pack just because you can in a digital environment and you don't have to print anything?
I think the age of the company can help with that, or the age of the when I say age, I mean the length of management. Sometimes when you get new management and a new board in, you can start to wind that back. But when you've got people that have been there for a long time, maybe, or procedures that haven't changed for a long time, I tend to see larger and larger and larger amounts of information going in, maybe because people like to show the amazing work they've done or what have you, but it can really be detrimental to actually showing the board the information that they need to make a good decision.
Well, that is a great segue to Colin Panagakis, our next guest, who is a senior account executive with world-leading board intelligence platform OnBoard. OnBoard has been doing great things to really get directors to have the tools that they need to adapt to this new digital environment that we're in. Well, I say new, relatively new, that many of us have been forced into due to COVID. With more than 10 years of experience in board management and governance, Colin is passionate about innovation and the potential for technology to bring about more informed, effective, and uncomplicated board meetings. Colin, we've heard Lisa and Tamara bring up a few pain points facing boards at the moment. I'd like to hear your thoughts on these topics, but first, could you give us an executive summary of what OnBoard is?
So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Lisa and Tammy. OnBoard is simply a solution to allow people to run effective meetings through their chosen devices. So we call it a board intelligence platform because, as we know, in 2011, iPads came out, people started adopting them to read their papers, and then there was a few initial board portal products that came out back then, and they've been running for a while. This is a new generation product, so there's so many systems that will allow you to distribute a board paper. A lot of people are using services such as Dropbox, are using a lot of other services they get with their Microsoft suites, SharePoint, things like that, through to the providers like OnBoard. But what we do is we actually make it really simple for board members to access their information and be able to make their notes and annotations. But the big thing that we're seeing at the moment with boards is it's really easy to get your board papers and read your board papers and make your notes. But what we're trying to do is keep the board members on message outside of the meetings, because what you're getting now is board members, as Lisa said, that are really busy. If you need to get into your meeting, you've only got your phone with you, well, then you need a platform that can handle that. And a lot of the other systems are quite antiquated in terms of allowing this agnostic access. And one of the big things that we've noticed recently, especially with COVID and the lockdowns, is people moving away from their iPads. So they've got their iPads. They say to me, Colin, I'm using my iPad, but I don't travel as much. So now I'm using my desktop computer with a big screen. And to be honest, I just want to have access on my phone. So when somebody rings up and says, you need to sign this or you need to vote, they can quickly go in and do it. And there's no reliance on them going back and logging into their computer or bringing up their iPad. So what we're seeing is a lot more collaboration back from the board members to the administrators or the CEO who need to make decisions and get things done. And we've got the tools. People have the most amazing phones these days. The power of their technology with their computers, fast internet, there's not really any issues anymore. Even logging in now. And one of the biggest issues we had in 2011 when I was selling a different board portal product is people remembering their passwords. Well, with a lot of systems now, it's facial recognition, Office 365, you can link your credentials. A lot of the browsers now will hold the credentials for you. So we've eliminated that. I think the issue of going into your different Zoom platforms, Teams, GoToMeetings and things like that is a little bit of an issue. And I think we've tried to simplify that by allowing board members to go into OnBoard and then just click on a button to bring up their Zoom calls. I think moving forward, although I am hearing people about to have their first face-to-face meetings in different states in Australia, there still is this reliance on having this hybrid situation where some people are not going to travel to the meeting. So I think there's so many things that are going on, and what we want to do is actually pull away all the noise and we want to simplify it.
And speaking of all the noise and all the activity that's going on in the online environment, a big issue at the moment is cybersecurity and data sovereignty. You're talking about signing a document on your phone. That's a very company sensitive action right there. And with so many different platforms, can you really trust being across multiple platforms on your phone? What does OnBoard do to resolve some of these security concerns?
Yes, security is huge. It's our biggest. There's a few priorities with our software, and one is usability, and secondly is security. So we use Microsoft Azure as the back end. With everyone's BYOD devices, we containerize the documents in the app. So as a good governance solution, the administrators have ultimate control over the information. So by using their own devices, they can have an OnBoard app there. The documents are encapsulated with the OnBoard app, all encrypted. And then if they sign the documents then on the back end, and then that's stored for historical purposes or printed off. The thing to note is if the person does lose their phone, or they hand it down to their grandchild because they got the latest phone, none of that information will remain on the device. So we've got all the SOC 2, the ISO 27001 accreditations that have had all these things tested. So it's of the utmost importance to ensure that these documents are confidential. And then you've got layers such as two-factor authentication, where it can SMS your code when you go to log in, if you want to go to that level of security.
And Lisa, perhaps you could contribute your thoughts and experience when it comes to matters of security with board cybersecurity specifically.
A few things that Colin picked up that kind of made me have a bit of a question mark, or an exclamation mark, a bit of a warning. Of course, there's access to that information and ensuring that it's securely parked away. Some of it is around questioning the legal implications. If you're signing something on your phone or even on a tablet, there's ways that you can accidentally press buttons and maybe vote one way instead of another, get confused at what you're looking at, think you're looking at one document and not the other, which really just points to imagining like you're using these tools, this technology, basically like what you would be doing if you were looking at paper documents in front of you. It's removing all of that distraction. It's really immersing yourself in the task at hand. So it's great that we have this technology, that it's portable, that we can do it on the run, we can do it on the fly, but it doesn't remove the fact that as directors, we have this duty of care and diligence, and that relates to all the work that you do regarding your director position. And I think that extends out to these sort of things, that if you are doing work on your board tasks, to really make sure that you're fully focused and concentrated on that. But also on the security fact that no one can see what you're doing, you're not accidentally sharing that, and that it is secure. And those two-factor authentications, I just think as a mandatory for boards as part of their risk management approach, would really encourage or mandate that as part of their adoption of technology and different tools like this to help them run their board.
And Tamara, I'm curious to hear what sort of cybersecurity or even online messaging related mistakes you see frequently in your line of work.
One thing that I really encourage company secretarial teams that I work with to not do is to encourage, if I can say, old school ways of providing board packs. So for example, having some sort of open portal where you're sending links around. I'm not talking about OnBoard so much as I'm talking about data storage platforms such as Dropbox or what have you. Sending links around where you've where you've not got a succinct, nice board pack put together, and you're asking people to go in and out of these platforms. I know a lot of them say they're secure, but I think it's putting some a lot of risk in there. The other thing is, moving away from technology for a moment, is printing of board packs. I think we should be looking at that, and how can we prevent that happening, not just for the environmental reasons, but for the possibility of discoverability of notes and things like that following a board meeting.
Mm-hmm. And Colin, what are your thoughts on the issue of printing of board packs and how OnBoard can accommodate the fact that some directors may be reticent to adopt digital tools?
I think the thing, Matt, is that I was speaking to a gentleman who runs quite a significant business in Australia, and I brought this up with him the other day, and he said, Colin, we wouldn't go back to printing because we've already made such big leaps and bounds to having everything accessible through digital platforms. So there's no need anymore to do that. I think there was a time where you had some board members want a hard copy. I think what you find is that if they've got their chosen device and they're happy using it, then that's the main thing there. So the big thing I'm noticing is that one board member may want to use their iPad Pro, another person may use their MacBook, another person will use their Windows laptop. We're seeing 3 or 4 board members with their laptops and other people with their iPads. I think the thing with things like digital access of information, you can keyword search, there's a lot more benefits to that than paper. And the other thing is that it's portable. And so if you forget your board pack with your notes and you left it at home, then you don't have any information to be able to do your job properly within the board meeting. The nice thing about digital is that if you've got it on your laptop and your iPad, and you did all the work on your computer, but you're going to actually go into town to meet with the board members, and you've got your iPads, the information's there. So I think we've come a long way, and I don't think we're going backwards.
And as we all know, the composition of a board evolves over time. People come and go, and all of that information could feasibly be stored and potentially be sensitive and not necessarily for a new director to see in, let's say, 2 or 3 years or 5 years' time. What is the approach to archiving or otherwise with the OnBoard platform?
So the idea actually is to have a clean copy of the pack there for historical purposes. So in the United States, we've got a charity called Ronald McDonald House, and the reason I use their name is they have 70 years of board papers in the system. So it's searchable, but I don't know if any board members are going to read back that far. But they are, they are, like, we do encourage people to put that in there, and that is encouraged to have that there for historical purposes, because if somebody wants to read what happened 10 years ago, then they've got every right to do that. And it's not just the previous board papers, but it's all the charters, the policy documents. You can have induction folders. It creates massive efficiencies for the administration team.
And how does that principle apply to the messaging function of OnBoard?
So the messaging function of OnBoard has a really cool situation, and it's a big thing that we're doing because a lot of boards have been using WhatsApp, and a lot of chairmen and CEOs are now actually saying, we want you to stop using WhatsApp and use a solution such as OnBoard for messaging. It has a setting where you can actually do what's called a deletion retention. So you can say after 30 days, just delete the previous history. So what we're trying to do is remove people away from emailing, from free services where you don't know what's going on with your messaging, and just have a chat group system in our messaging solution where you can have access to documents, be able to have everything encapsulated for the relevant committee, and then people can message, do their communication, address what they need to, they need to have a phone call, then they can do that as well. But it's really about protecting that committee at that time. And then as you have some succession, some people stepping down, being appointed, when they go onto those chat groups, let's say it's the board, the previous history is deleted to protect people, and then that way they can feel free to chat as they feel, but not be worried about whether someone's going to read it down the track.
And Lisa or Tamara, do either of you have anything you'd like to say about private messaging before we move on to the next topic?
I do. I have legal alarm bells ringing in my head, and this is where it's so important, and it really emphasizes the need for boards to set themselves some game rules or rules of engagement, even around these tools that are available for them to use. Say, for example, the board uses this inbuilt messaging system or any messaging system, and they discuss something that in the future becomes of material interest, of importance, or they make a decision. If there's no retention in a different location, or it's ratified at the next board meeting so that it's properly minuted and documented, that there's really, that opens up a lot of risk, I feel, and should be something that boards really seriously think about, how they utilize these sort of things, not just within OnBoard, of course, but other messaging systems as well, and what's being discussed there. What decisions, do we even make decisions through this mechanism, or is everything retained for a period of time, like we do with other documentation, in case it becomes of pertinent interest at some point in the future? So that there's still that important thing to discuss as a board, how we're going to use this and how it fits in with our overall processes, risk management, and really just taking that care and diligence in how they're doing the work of the board.
And Tamara, were there any legal alarm bells for you when hearing Colin discuss that?
Yeah, well, yes and no. The biggest thing for me on going on what Lisa just said, which is totally correct, is really understanding the duties and responsibilities of a director and what it means when you say yes to becoming a director. It really makes no difference whether it's a not-for-profit or an ASX-listed company. Your responsibilities and duties to your company and members, shareholders, is the same, and you should be absolutely understanding of what you should and shouldn't be saying, the code of conduct of your particular company, and how you should be making decisions and resolutions. And, you know, although I agree with what Lisa said, and what you said is exactly right, if you don't have the knowledge and understanding before you get onto OnBoard and start to have a chat on that messaging system, and you understand what you can and can't chat about, you need to be thinking about your whether you should be continuing as a director and what further education you might need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when it comes to directors' responsibilities, obviously there are major decisions to be made all of the time, and having the right data can be of great assistance. Colin, would you be able to tell us how OnBoard provides useful data just about the types of materials and who's reading what in a board, ahead of a board meeting or during, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've added in what we call meeting metrics or engagement metrics. So if you had, for example, a board of 10 directors, you could see on a dashboard where people are actually looking at the packs, how much time's being spent across the board members, where people are doing most of their annotations. And it's really good because as a group, they can see this. So they know that if there's a paper where nobody's actually read anything or nobody's made any notes and there's no time spent, is there something wrong with the author who provided that content, and do we need to change the way it's being previewed? It's absolutely huge, because the thing is, with most systems, you give the board members the papers, And then it's just a gamble whether they've read the papers and whether they've done their preparation work to address the meeting. So this is really smart. It's really engaging, not just for the chair and the CEO, but for all the board members, so they can actually log on and see the meeting metrics. There's also a feedback area where they can, there's a 5-star rating, and then they can write some comments. So what we're seeing is more of this collaboration coming back to the organisers of the meeting, saying this was really good. I wonder if, you know, next meeting we could look at doing X, Y, Z. And so there's a lot more of that, and it's massive. And I had a gentleman the other day, quite large in terms of his work in the telecommunication industry, and he goes, Colin, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we need the board members to get used to. And it wasn't even about the board paper and the board paper metrics, but it's about getting used to that dashboard style of running your business, where you've got your graphs, you've got your KPIs, and then you're measuring how they're all going. And it's the way everything's going now. So you think about the journey that we've had with banking, with so many different services moving to technology, and our board members need to be 5 steps ahead of everyone else, because they're the ones that are making the decisions that are going to benefit the business moving forward. And if they don't, it doesn't matter, because there's a disruptor who's just about to do it anyway.
And how well can that assess various sections or agenda items that perhaps directors haven't paid enough attention to?
Well, there's no hiding that. So it addresses exactly the fact that if they haven't read the paper or the particular agenda item, then obviously the chair needs to then question the board and say, look, what is the issue with this? And there could be multiple issues, but what we're doing is we're allowing the committee or the board to dig deeper, to understand what's going on with that respective agenda item, and then be able to make this better for the board. So that's why we call it, you know, engagement metrics, because we're trying to get that level of engagement to the next level, because there's plenty of platforms out there that distribute a pack, and that's not anything special anymore. Some of them are clunky, but what this is doing is allowing that engagement where the board's valued, what they're doing is valued, and that dashboard addresses that and shows everyone, this is where we're spending time, this is where we're not spending time. What do we need to do here to make the outcome better for everyone?
And as I understand it, that's aggregating all of the directors, and it's actually anonymized. Why take that approach? Why not name and shame?
I think the idea is to aggregate because there's no need to name and shame. You know, I've been on a not-for-profit board, and you know who hasn't read their paper. We know that that happens. So I don't think we need to do that. I think what we need to do is lift the level of engagement across the committee, across the board. There's some board members we have to respect are not going to do certain things, and that may be understood within the committee. The reason they're on the committee may be for various reasons. So I think the idea is to lift their digital engagement and their digital understanding of things. And it's not that hard. So, you know, when people just jump onto something and embrace it, they'll actually find their life a lot easier. And you think about internet banking, you know, we don't have a little book that gets stamped anymore at the bank. In fact, Matt, you're so young, you probably never had one. But the reality is people are used to getting onto their phones, seeing their bank balance, doing transactions now with their phones, their watches, or whatever it may be. You know, what technology's done is incredible. So I think people feel fine about seeing the aggregation of the information. And I think it's the information, the content, and the time spent on all this that's important. And if people aren't logging in, the aggregation still will show that, you know, if you've only had 8 people download the pack, then you know 2 people haven't. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
And Tamara, a lot of your job is getting directors to adopt these sort of platforms, and also trying to get them to do more, prepare more succinct packs and the like. When given this sort of data, what sort of effects are you seeing from boards? Are they improving their process? Are you seeing material gains in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for the company secretary to know their worth and to come in and show how the board can improve themselves and their decision-making processes. So I've definitely seen, I've actually spent some time in the UK, and I was a little surprised when I came back to see how many people or companies had never even heard of a board pack portal or similar. So I've really seen adoption quite quickly, I guess, recently. I've met a lot of walls come straight up at me, but you talk through it, you help them understand, go through the bits and pieces that Colin has mentioned and Lisa has mentioned. And after almost 1 month, the first month seeing the board pack portal and seeing things online and just the change that it can make, people seem to have actually adopted it reasonably quickly. And one thing that I thought of a little earlier was when there's a change to a paper, so let's say you've got a 70-page pack and there's one change to one paper, it's actually been really helpful to be able to swap that paper out, advise the board that that's happened, rather than in the different ways of doing it where 3 people have 3 different versions of a pack and it's just an absolute nightmare. I'm sure we've all been sitting in a meeting where somebody said turn to page 7 and 3 people are on different page 7s. So I've actually found once you guide them into it and show them the real benefits, the adoption is actually really good.
And Lisa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think in relation to adopting and bringing people into sort of the digital land in running their board processes, I think Colin and Tamara have kind of alluded to the fact that it is a journey. You can't just lift people up and throw them in a new environment with new processes, different ways of doing things without taking them on that journey. And I feel like so many boards see, if they don't know, that all they do is they see digital as just doing what we do as analog, just now digital. And so what's the difference and what is the value? And you nearly need to get into it and see what's possible before you can step back and go, okay, we're going to really change and be really intentional about how we manage ourselves as a board, knowing that we have these tools and capabilities available to us. Now, board, how would you like us to run ourselves and to manage our work that we have to do?
And a lot of that relates to culture. Now, Tamara, early on in this discussion, you mentioned how there was a little bit of a pain point in boards adapting to these types of web conferences that are so common. But what are some of the positive sides of that on both the way that board meeting conducted and also company culture?
I absolutely think that everybody being on screen in this sort of Brady Bunch situation has allowed people to possibly become a little bit more respectful in the way that they speak at board meetings, because you can see who's speaking. It's almost the spirit stick going around who gets to talk. And so I think, and people don't want to be, as I said earlier, on the conference call for too long. So with your new fabulous new agenda, with your timing down the side, the chair can start to make sure that everything is a lot more efficient in that way. But I also have found that although being on video and us all being apart in this COVID situation is isolating, and it's actually shown us all how human we are, because we're seeing into each other's houses and we're seeing children and dogs and cats and you know, house plants and things like that. So and we all can pop onto the meeting a minute early and have a quick chat about how our parents are going or what have you. So I think although it's created almost more of a corporate world, it's actually swung across the pendulum to create a very corporate world that's also quite personal.
And that actually brings me to another question I had, and it's quite open for any of you to respond to, and that's the matter of distractions. So you mentioned personal distractions, but we're also faced with so many different tabs open on our computer screens and messages and notifications on our phones. How is that element of just focus and workflow within meetings being affected by all of these distractions?
Yeah, I'm happy to go in first. It's always there. There's always distractions. Having a device where our board packs are, of course, opens us up to being more easily distracted, because we could just close out of that screen and open up Facebook or check our emails or whatever people are looking at these days. So we always have to keep in mind, regardless of where we are, how we're meeting, is that duty and responsibility that we have, particularly the care and diligence, and that comes down to, what are you doing in the meeting? So there's that thing we have to think about, but also when we're meeting in these online environments like in Zoom, Teams, whatever it is to know that that's a little bit more fatiguing than meeting face to face, which is a little bit more energizing to us. So making sure that we're incorporating regular short breaks that really break up and allow us to get up and stand up, move around, and just re-energize, particularly when you're going in between really heavy, in-depth, critical elements of your board meeting, that having a break at the end of each of those to just kind of get a glass of water or whatever it is, shake it out, might really help you to come into the next thing a little bit more refreshed and renewed.
Mm-hmm. And Colin, how do you find that a board management tool or platform such as OnBoard can assist that very human aspect of running a board and day-to-day activities of a board of directors?
I think, Matt, as we've all experienced, everyone's going through the same thing, and it's not like it's succinct to one person. So a good example is when they closed the schools and a lot of people had school kids or grandkids with them. I think that the thing about OnBoard that's nice is that if you did log in to read your paper and got distracted and had to take care of something and went back in half an hour, it'll be there on the page that you last read. You can't stop certain things, and as Lisa quite rightly said, you need to space things out. I think the reality is that we're going through different levels of this personal human element. Kids are back at school now for everyone, but we don't know what's around the corner. And I've been completely guilty of having someone come into my Zoom calls with this Zoom bombing, and clients have as well. And I think this is just normality. There's a humorous element to it. It's not good. It does pull away from what Lisa said about the critical elements, but it's life, and people understand, and people have been very good with it. So I think we just move forward. One of Lisa's comments about the journey, it is the journey, and everyone's going through this journey. Some a bit harder than others, obviously, depending on the state. But it's what's going on, and I think we're doing really well. I think we're doing exceptionally well, and this is biased to people in Australia and New Zealand.
Mm-hmm. And just finally, because we do need to make some time for questions from our guests today, our participants. We've got one question. What can we do to support the more technophobic board members who actually bring great experience and expertise and added value to the board? What can we do to help those people?
I'll take that if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think, as I said earlier, and as Lisa said, it's about the journey, and so it's about starting with creating your new executive summaries or agendas or new ways of putting information to the board that is using word processing and technology behind the scenes, and then getting that onto these platforms, and then showing the directors the reduced pack, the fact that it's sitting there on a screen that you can then doodle on or annotate, and showing them the metrics and showing them all of these sorts of information that will save them time. Directors are time poor usually. So that's how I've helped to get reticent directors into looking at this kind of technology.
And Lisa or Colin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Lisa,
I always have thoughts. I'm going to take a more, let's call it cynical response to this. These kind of moments in a board's existence probably provide a good time for the board to assess what is the culture that we want going forward, and how do we make sure that we're comprised of people who align and adopt and champion that culture. The chances are, if you have a culture in the boardroom that's very conscious of technological advances, what's available to us, and ready to review and adopt those where it makes sense, then that's going to filter down into the organization, and you'll have an organization that's more readily going to be doing those kind of things as well. So it's just worth considering that if they are really valuable, this board member, and they just flat out refuse to use these kind of tools, I would encourage finding a way that you can still utilize that person and kind of fit them in somehow while still ensuring that they are meeting their legal responsibilities. But I do find that that kind of attitude may signal that this person perhaps have reached their expiration date and may need to be moved to a committee if they are very valuable, or perhaps a different kind of role or relationship with the organization if it's causing that much of a problem. But I'm probably going a bit extreme there, but it's indicative of a broader mindset.
Well, cruel to be kind, I suppose.
Yeah.
So,
I'll
so
give you a couple
essentially,
of experiences that I've had. One, we've got an 82-year-old board member using OnBoard, and he absolutely loves it. And we've got extensive training on the system. But one of the examples is I was training a board member. He was probably in his 70s, and now with and generally if there's this reluctance, and the iPad is the chosen platform because one, it's really easy. But I remember training a board member a little while ago, and with things like facial recognition on an iPad, you don't need to worry about anything. You just click on the app, and then it'll open straight up. But when I was showing this board member, I said to him, look, this is OnBoard on the iPad. This is how it works. And he said, oh, that's easy. It's just like a big iPhone. So I think what we need to do is look at where they're at now. Do they use an iPhone? Do they go into their internet banking? Do they read their emails on an iPhone? And then to move them to a device like an iPad, even an iPad Pro with a big screen. It's an easy part of the journey. And I love that word journey, because you think about Microsoft and the journey people have had with Excel and with Word. And you think about these iPhone providers or these phone providers and the journey with their operating systems. It's the same thing here. If you do get a board member who's not going to move to using an iPad or even consider it, then you're not. And in that case there, you have to print a pack. And I know I've had a company secretary of a listed company say to me, Colin, I'm only printing 2 packs out of 10. And if that's the case, that's the case, because that senior member could be one of the founders, could be someone who is not moving and won't move. And so I think we just need to take it on a case-by-case basis. But I do encourage using that path of moving them to an iPad, giving it to them for consideration. And I had one director in Melbourne, really high-profile board member, and he got excited by the iPad because his granddaughter set it up for him and showed him how to use it. So there's different ways we can look at all of this. And I think some of it is a different approach, but it works. And I think we need to just have those considerations in mind.
Yeah, so one take home from that is that the entry point is crucial. If one route doesn't work, try another and just
Yeah.
get to know these people on a human level, on a cultural level. How do they work, and how can we find the right device or technological solution for them? How do we ease them into it? Well, we've got another question from someone, and given Lisa mentioned earlier that sometimes you simply have the case that there are certain board members that are taking up more of the workload than others, and some people are really just there to warm seats, as it were. Are some, and this is for anyone to answer, are some people just taking on too many boards, taking on too many board positions?
Yeah, it's definitely a risk. It's something I see often reflected in the policies for larger organizations. I'm doing some research into the big four banks, and that type of approach, so limiting the amount of boards that each board member sits on, particularly ASX listed companies, but we can extrapolate that down to the grassroots level, things like that. People are working full time and sitting on the board at night and have a family and have a life. And so we're all trying to make it work. And overboarded directors is a real risk. It impairs their ability to do their job really well for one particular board. Instead, they're spread over 3 or 4 or 5, or sometimes 8 or 9 or 10. So these boards have a policy that limits and restricts the number of board positions that other board members can hold, but they also extend that down into their CEO level and sometimes into their senior management as well, because noticing that whilst on one hand it can be a real opportunity for their senior leaders in the organization to hold board positions and have that exposure and have that experience building, that at the other extreme, if they're doing too much of that, then that's a risk to the organization that they're meant to be leading. So it's something that we all need to consider. If it's not a policy on your board, is to just really be realistic with yourself. And one of the first questions that I encourage people to ask themselves when they come to me and say, I want to get on a board, is like, first, do you know what you're getting into? And second, do you have the time? Do you have the capacity? It's not just you've got to come to a board meeting and sit there for 2 or 3 hours. It's the preparation, it's the committee work, it's the offline work, it's the networking, it's everything else, learning and development that goes around that. And do you have capacity for it?
We actually have a few other questions that we do need to get to, but I am curious, in light of the fact that there is this trend of overboarding in some cases, are you seeing the rising talent, younger directors being attracted to boards in a big way to have that pipeline for the future?
Yeah, I find that we've spent a lot of time concentrating on gender balance in the boardroom, which is fantastic. We're making some exceptional progress there, which is great. Our next hurdle, I feel like, is around age. So we're appreciating and understanding the value that I'll say younger, they're not young, they're just younger than the traditional board members. We're seeing that become a focus for boards to bring in younger people, which is fantastic because they bring that different perspective and that different viewpoint. So now we're really starting to talk about diversity in a diverse way, not just limiting it to one area. So these younger people are going to have that expectation that boards have it together, that they have their processes, procedures, policies, the way they manage their workload, the way they work together smooth. And that's what they're expecting. So there's that real opportunity for boards to attract the talent with the younger people by spending the time to get really slick and smooth with their board processes, to utilize the technology that really reduces that friction for the board members to do their work, that will attract that younger person, because these people are choosing your board as much as your board is choosing them. So think about it from that perspective as well.
Okay, well, and Tamara, is there anything that you'd like to add relating to either overboarding or the trends that we're seeing with incoming talent to boardrooms?
Just that, again, people that are wanting to be on boards, especially at a younger age, and then choosing those people, making sure those people understand completely what they're getting into, what the role is, and why they're there, and maybe looking for those younger people to bring in some new processes and things, but really it's about understanding the importance of that role.
Mm-hmm. I've got another question that is more technical in nature. I'll pass it to you, Colin, first. If you put comments in OnBoard's platform, are those notes discoverable if there is ever an investigation into the board's decisions or lack of attention or questions?
I guess everything's discoverable. I think the reality is that if something's subpoenaed, then I guess it is discoverable. So as Lisa said earlier on, you know, you have to be careful what you write, what you say. So no technology is foolproof, and the simple answer is everything's discoverable if they want to find it.
Mm-hmm. And Tamara or Lisa, I would imagine that you'd have the same view just from a legal standpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tamara, you want to go?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I think mirroring what I said earlier, that you should have the knowledge of what you should and shouldn't be saying in these sorts of platforms. If you want to have a chat about something, you probably want to call your fellow directors until you want to make it an official chat.
Yeah. It's I mean, I come back to it. It's having clarity and everyone knows what's expected and understood and how they're going to do things. And that the information sharing and the way that that's done and how it's done is certainly a conversation that the board needs to have, not only for a risk protection sort of thing, but we're all jointly responsible, everyone on a board. And so you don't want this small cohort of the board going and building an alliance and basically making a decision in a majority and then coming to the board and just pushing that through, because you've got a board within a board, and when everyone's responsible, that just brings everyone into the mix. It emphasizes why trust is so critical on a board as well, for that very reason. And I wouldn't tell people, like, don't be scared of making notes, talking through things, sending emails. Really, the only way that a board can evidence that they were doing the right thing, let's say, whatever that right thing is in the circumstances, is evidenced through things like your minutes, through notes that you make at the board meeting, and other material, your board pack included. So don't be scared of using those in the right way. Just know that they need to be sufficient, adequate enough to show and demonstrate that you did meet or did everything you could to meet your duties and responsibilities that relate to that particular matter that's on the table.
And like Tamara said before, directors are very time poor. So having a system like OnBoard can be of assistance to help you up some of that time, so they're less likely to make poor decisions or to overlook certain matters. Colin, I've got another question for you. It's quite general in nature. You have covered some of this already, but you might have some other ideas. Is the OnBoard platform useful and affordable for small businesses?
So it just depends on what they're trying to achieve. So yes, it's affordable. When we talk about small business, I need to understand better what their situation is in terms of a fit. So if it's a dispersed board that's across the country and there's highly sensitive information, then yes. If it's a small business that's working in a suburb or locality where all the directors are close by, then maybe not. I think that we've got to understand better, but they can certainly contact us and we can understand their needs and work it out from there. So we do have preferential pricing for not-for-profits, for example. In terms of pricing, we're extremely competitive compared to some of the expensive old products out there. So we certainly would want to speak to them to help them.
Great. Well, that's all the questions from the audience today. To finish off, perhaps any of you might have some final thoughts or reflections, ideas that you didn't have a chance to bring up earlier.
I do. There's one thing that I wanted to emphasize as well, which I'm doing a lot of today. Everything's important, is to really be considerate and balance off this efficiency and effectiveness that tools like OnBoard provide, with really still keeping in mind that you need to meet your director's duties, especially around care and diligence. And I know I flogged that one to death, but if you start looking into it, you realize it's kind of a gateway into some other director breaches that may come up. So you'll hear people talk a lot about that. It's all well and good to have efficient processes, but remember the effectiveness, and part of effectiveness is ensuring that it enables you to meet your duties and responsibilities under the various laws that apply to you and your organization at that particular time. And then on the other hand is that, which we kind of mentioned, is that sometimes these tools can get hijacked and people just shove information in there because it's easy, there's low friction, we can just get it in there, and the board needs more information, more. Well, more is not more. Always remember as board members that the board packs, the information you receive is under your control. And so you need to be really careful and specific about what information you're getting, in what format and in what quantity. Because if you've got too much, you can't digest it, especially when there's tools that show whether you've looked at something or not. Could be used against you, could be used for you, so keep that in mind as well. But that you have control over that, you should exercise that right and make sure that you have sufficient, adequate information that you need to make the best decision in your judgment on that particular issue.
Fantastic. Well, Colin, Tamara, do you have any final comments you'd like to add?
Tammy?
My only thought was the person that asked the question earlier about should they look at a board pack portal depending on the size of the business. I would say if you have a board, if your company's big enough to have a board, I would absolutely look at a board pack portal to make sure all your information is in the right place, and making sure you have a good and competent and excited company secretary or corporate governance person is really important, especially on what Lisa just said in her closing comments around the conduct of how you're managing your board and managing your corporate governance and managing your data.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And Colin, any final thoughts?
My only final remark is that I think for organizations, the key thing is to just simplify everything. Stop making things hard on everyone. Simplify things. I can't say how much Lisa's comments and Tammy's comments need to be just reverberated, because you just really need to simplify things to make it easier for people. So thank you.
Well, it is and thanks to all of you for your time and especially your insights that have been so in depth, and it really will help so many directors and aspiring directors on their journeys towards board digitalization. We will be republishing this webinar online, so anyone can look at it at any time, and putting together a feature article on it as well with all of your insights. So that I know that we've covered a lot of ground and it's a lot to take in. So we'll try to distill that for everyone so you can read it and have that as a rough guide and share it with your friends. So thanks very much and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.